I'm Sam, 43 years old, used to work as a project manager at a small construction firm in Asheville, North Carolina. I wasn't exactly living the high life, but it paid the bills and gave me enough stability to feel like I was building something real. Or at least I thought I was. 6 years into dating Zara, I figured we were solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs. What couple doesn't? I thought we were a team. I thought she was my best friend. The one who stood by me through bad contracts, layoffs, and my mom's sudden stroke. Turns out, the only thing she was loyal to was her own amusement. It was my best friend Nate's wedding. A fancy outdoor affair at a vineyard just outside of Asheville. The kind of place that smelled like money and fresh-cut grass, with white tents and a 5-piece string quartet that played Pachelbel's Canon on loop. I should have known something was off when Zara kept darting away to check on the cake or grab a drink, but I didn't piece it together until much later. The first real gut punch came when I walked in on them, Zara and Nate, in the coat closet. Not just a stolen kiss, not a drunken mistake. No, they were halfway to losing every last shred of decency they had. Nate's wedding suit rumpled, Zara's dress hitched up. My whole world tilted on its axis right there in the shadows of someone else's big day. I backed out so quietly they didn't even notice. Now here's the twist. I didn't just stumble on them that night. I'd known for months. I'd seen the late-night texts on Zara's phone, the sudden work emergencies, the sly glances at Nate's place during game nights. I convinced myself it wasn't what it looked like, or maybe I was too scared to admit it. But there it was, confirmed in the most humiliating cinematic way possible. And the worst part? Everyone else knew. Our entire friend group, the people I'd laughed with, confided in, built poker nights and camping trips with, they all knew and laughed behind my back. I found out from a mutual friend who thought I should hear it from someone who cared. Turns out they'd been taking bets on how long it would take me to catch on. They called it the Sam and Nate Show, like my heartbreak was some twisted sitcom for their entertainment. That night, I didn't confront Zara or Nate. I didn't shout, didn't throw a punch, didn't storm out in a blaze of fury. Instead, I waited. I stayed through the whole ceremony, through the toasts, the first dance, the cake cutting. I kept my mask on, clapping and smiling like nothing was wrong. Because if they were going to treat me like a joke, I'd give them a finale they'd never forget. I made my move during my toast. I was the best man after all. When I raised my glass and thanked everyone for coming, I spoke with a steady, calm voice. I complimented Nate and Zara's incredible chemistry and how their connection had really blossomed over the last few months. The laughter turned awkward, heads tilted, eyes widened. But I didn't stop. I laid it all out. The affair, the lies, the betrayal. By the time I finished, the bride was sobbing, the guests were whispering, and Nate stood frozen like a statue. His brand new wife had stormed out in her wedding gown, leaving him there like a discarded prop. Zara tried to follow her, but the bride's family blocked her way. Nate was left standing alone in his designer tux, surrounded by empty chairs and unfinished glasses of champagne. I didn't look back as I walked out of that vineyard. But even now, years later, I can still hear the echo of my own toast in my ears. And that's just the beginning. Within a week, my phone lit up with messages from mutual friends. Some were angry, calling me immature, cruel, saying I'd ruined Nate's life. Others, quieter but no less irritating, just sent passive-aggressive texts. You okay? Or heard what happened? That's rough, man. Like they weren't all part of the joke. Like I hadn't seen them laughing at my expense for months. Zara called too. Once. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice tight with manufactured concern, saying we needed to talk this through like adults. As if her betrayal was some minor misunderstanding. A week later, her messages turned cold. She accused me of ruining Nate's life, said he'd lost his job and his family disowned him, that he was broke and couch surfing, that if I'd just kept my mouth shut, none of this would have happened. That was rich, coming from her. The woman who'd stabbed me in the back was now blaming me for the mess she and Nate had made. But here's the thing, I didn't owe her anything. I didn't owe Nate anything. And I sure as hell didn't owe the rest of our so-called friends an apology for refusing to let them keep using me as the punchline. So I cut them all off. Every single one of them. Deleted numbers, blocked contacts, wiped social media. I spent the next few months licking my wounds in silence. There were days I felt like I was drowning in my own bitterness. Like the betrayal had sunk so deep I'd never claw my way out. But slowly, that bitterness faded into something colder and sharper. I focused on work, poured every ounce of my anger into the projects at the firm. I picked up extra shifts, took on the most thankless assignments, and made myself indispensable. And when the inevitable layoffs came, I was one of the few they kept. Not out of loyalty or friendship, just because I'd become too valuable to lose. And that was the moment I realized something. I wasn't the victim they thought I was. I wasn't the sad, pathetic guy left standing at the altar of friendship while everyone else moved on. I was the guy who could survive, who could take betrayal and humiliation and turn it into quiet, seething resolve. I even found someone new, though that came later. Someone who didn't know Nate, didn't know Zara, didn't care about the tangled mess I'd left behind. Someone who saw me not as a cautionary tale, but as a man rebuilding. There's something you don't think about when you burn everything down. The silence. At first, it feels like a relief. No more phone calls from concerned friends. No texts asking how I'm holding up. But soon enough, that silence turns into a weight. A thick, oppressive quiet that wraps around you like a blanket soaked in regret. I started to notice the small things. The way I'd walk into my apartment after work and the only sound was my keys hitting the counter. How I'd wake up on Saturday mornings with no plans because all those plans used to involve people who weren't in my life anymore. The way I'd sit at the coffee shop and realize there wasn't anyone to call. No one to text about the weird dog I'd just seen or the funny thing a barista said. But here's the thing, I got used to it. The silence stopped feeling suffocating and started feeling honest. Like I was finally hearing my own thoughts without the noise of everyone else's expectations. And in that quiet, I started to see patterns I'd missed before. Patterns in my relationships, in the way I let people treat me, in how I always bent over backwards for the people I thought cared, only to be discarded when it was convenient for them. I thought back to the first time I let myself be the punchline. High school, probably. That so-called best friend who'd ask me for favors and then disappear when I needed something. College, where I was always the designated driver, the guy who lent out notes, the one who covered someone else's share of pizza. Work, where I covered shifts, worked late, said yes to every project. And then Zara. The final act of a lifetime of being too accommodating. I didn't want to be that guy anymore. So I made changes. I didn't just block the old crowd. I stopped bending. At work, I started setting boundaries. I said no when I was overloaded, pushed back when someone tried to dump a task on me. And you know what? People respected it. Not everyone, but enough. I wasn't the guy they could walk all over anymore. And as for Zara and Nate, well, Nate's fall from grace was faster than I expected. His bride filed for annulment within days. His parents cut him off. And last I heard, he was couch surfing with a distant cousin in Greensboro. Zara kept trying to text, her messages flipping between anger and desperation. I ignored everyone. And then twist, one night a knock on my door. I opened it to find Zara standing there, drenched from the rain, her mascara smeared, clutching a soggy purse. She said she was sorry, that she was scared, that she had nowhere else to go, that Nate had cut her off after blaming her for everything. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost let her in. But I didn't. I told her to leave, closed the door, and listened as the rain swallowed her retreating footsteps. After that night, something in me settled. It wasn't peace, not exactly. More like a quiet resolve. I was done being the guy everyone leaned on and laughed at. Done being the safe, reliable fallback when they burned their bridges. It was time to rebuild, and this time it would be on my own terms. The first step was practical. I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with Zara. Found a small one-bedroom on the west side of Asheville. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I bought a second-hand couch, a rickety coffee table, and a few lamps. The walls were bare, the shelves empty. But every night I came home, it felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. Work, surprisingly, became a refuge. With Nate and the others gone from my social circle, I could finally focus without the constant drama. I threw myself into projects, learned new skills, even volunteered to help train new hires. My boss noticed. For the first time in years, I got a raise, small but symbolic. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't as disposable as they made me feel. On weekends, I took long drives through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Just me, the road, and whatever playlist felt right. I'd stop at little diners, sip bad coffee, and watch the world go by. No one asked me for anything. No one expected me to play the clown, the fixer, the dependable one. I thought about reaching out to old friends, but every time I scrolled through my contacts, I felt that bitter knot tighten in my chest. The idea of explaining what had happened, or worse, hearing them pretend they'd been on my side all along, was unbearable. So I stayed quiet. And then, one afternoon, I met her. At a tiny bookstore near Pack Square, of all places. I was browsing the used fiction section when she reached for the same dog-eared copy of Catch-22. Our hands touched, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't bitterness or regret. Her name was Elise. She wasn't flashy or dramatic. She wasn't the kind of woman who filled up a room with her presence. She had this quiet confidence, a way of making you feel like she was really listening, really seeing you. After that chance encounter in the bookstore, we started running into each other around Asheville, at the farmer's market, the coffee shop near my office, even at a little food truck festival downtown. Each time felt easy, unforced. It wasn't like those strained, performative friendships I'd kept for years with Nate and the rest. Elise didn't know my baggage. She didn't know Zara, didn't know about the wedding toast, didn't care about who I'd been or what I'd lost. She just knew me as the guy who liked old books and drank his coffee black. I found myself telling her little things about my life, how I'd taken up sketching again after years of ignoring it, how I'd always wanted to learn how to fix up old motorcycles but never had the time, how I hated how quiet my apartment was but loved the independence of it. She listened, sometimes offering a quiet comment or sharing a story of her own. A memory about her grandmother's recipes, a funny story from her job at the library. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't apologizing for who I was or pretending to be more than what I had to offer. Elise never asked about my past, and I didn't volunteer it. It was a fragile piece, but it was mine. And just when I thought maybe, just maybe, I was starting to climb out of the wreckage, Zara reappeared. It was a rainy Thursday night when Zara showed up outside my apartment. I should have known it was her. The pattern of knocks was too familiar, too tentative. I almost didn't open the door. Almost. But the part of me that hadn't fully burned her out, the part that still wanted answers, let me turn the knob. She looked like a mess. Wet hair plastered to her face. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching her phone like it was the last piece of her old life she had left. She didn't say a word at first, just stood there, dripping on my welcome mat, like she was waiting for me to invite her in. I didn't. She finally spoke, her voice trembling, asking if we could talk, that she needed to explain, that she'd been lost, scared, manipulated by Nate, that she'd made a mistake, but that I'd made it worse with my toast, that everything was falling apart and she didn't know where else to turn. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the months of lying, the snickering friends, the smug glances. I remembered how easily she'd slipped into betrayal and how little she cared about who got hurt as long as she came out ahead. I told her no. Firm, quiet. She begged, said she had nowhere else to go. I said that wasn't my problem anymore, that I hoped she found whatever she was looking for, but it wouldn't be from me. Zara stared at me, her mouth trembling like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. Then she turned, walking off into the rain, shoulders slumped like a woman who finally realized she'd lost her last card to play. And I closed the door. This time I didn't look back. After Zara's last visit, the silence returned, but this time it felt like victory. A quiet, hard-won victory. There were no more surprise knocks at the door, no desperate texts. The last remnants of that tangled mess of lies and betrayal were finally out of my life. I threw myself into my routine, rebuilt one quiet, deliberate piece at a time. I'd wake up, make coffee, work my shifts, take long walks through the Blue Ridge Mountains, and come home to my little apartment. The simple rhythm of it felt grounding, like I was slowly stitching myself back together. It wasn't flashy. There were no dramatic moments, no tearful realizations, just the slow, steady work of reclaiming a life. And in that process, I realized something else. I'd been waiting for closure, for some grand gesture of apology or justice that would make everything feel finished. But closure never comes like that. It comes in the quiet, in the decision to stop waiting for the apology that will never come, the justice that will never be served. It comes in deciding to live better, not for them, but for yourself. Elise was still there, in the background, showing up at the bookstore, smiling when our paths crossed at the market. We hadn't crossed any lines, hadn't even gone for coffee yet. But there was something unspoken between us, a quiet understanding that maybe we were both healing, both figuring out who we wanted to be without the people who'd hurt us. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just living. It was a cold evening in late November when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have ignored it, let it go to voicemail like all the others. But something in me hesitated, and I answered. It was Nate's mother. I hadn't heard from her in years, not since before the wedding. Her voice was low, brittle. She said she was sorry to bother me, but that Nate was in bad shape. Lost his job, drinking too much, sleeping in his car. She didn't ask me to help, not directly. But her voice carried that old weight, the unspoken plea of a mother trying to save her son from his own wreckage. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to tell her Nate had made his bed and could lie in it. But another part of me, the one that still remembered all the years of friendship before it shattered, just sat there in silence, listening. She said she didn't know what else to do, that Nate had burned through every bridge, alienated everyone who might have helped him, that she was worried he might not make it through the winter. And then she asked if I could at least talk to him. I don't know what made me agree. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the echo of all those years when I'd believed Nate was my brother in everything but blood. I told her I'd think about it, hung up, and sat in the dark, the weight of that decision pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to open that door again. Took me 3 days to make the decision. 3 days of restless nights, of staring at the ceiling while the weight of that phone call gnawed at the edges of my resolve. And when I finally called Nate, it was more out of curiosity than compassion. I wanted to see what he looked like now, hear how far he'd fallen. Maybe I needed proof that I'd done the right thing, or maybe I just wanted to look into the eyes of the man who'd helped shatter everything I thought I knew. We met at a diner just outside of Asheville, one of those places where the coffee is burnt, and the waitresses know your name. He looked worse than I'd imagined. Hollow eyes, scruffy beard, clothes that hung off him like they'd belonged to someone else. He smelled faintly of cheap whiskey and stale cigarettes, and for a second, I almost turned around and left. But I didn't. We sat across from each other, the air thick with everything that hadn't been said. He tried to break the tension with a weak smile, but it crumbled under the weight of his own shame. He said he was sorry, said he hadn't meant for any of it to happen, that he'd been stupid and selfish and drunk on the attention, that he missed the friendship we used to have. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him it was too little, too late, but all I could do was sit there, staring at the man I'd once called my brother, wondering how we'd gotten to this place. In the end, I didn't offer him money. I didn't offer him a place to stay. But I did offer him one thing, a chance to get help. I told him about a local shelter, a program that might give him a shot at getting clean and back on his feet. He nodded, not meeting my eyes, and said he'd think about it. I left him there in that diner watching the rain hit the windows. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. It's strange how life settles into a new rhythm when you let it. After that meeting with Nate, the heaviness I'd carried for so long seemed to lift, like I'd finally set down a weight I didn't even realize I'd been holding. I wasn't naive enough to think everything would magically fix itself, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I kept to my quiet life. Early mornings, long walks, books stacked on my coffee table. Elise was still there, always at the edges of my world, her presence steady and unassuming. We finally did go out for coffee. One drizzly afternoon when I saw her standing in line at the same coffee shop I'd been frequenting. It wasn't a date, not exactly. Just two people sharing a table, sipping lattes, and talking about everything except the past. There was something healing in the simplicity of it. No expectations, no weighty conversations. Just two people sitting in the quiet, enjoying each other's company. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I didn't need a dramatic closure or a grand gesture to move on. Maybe all I needed was a slow, steady rebuild. Brick by brick, step by step. Elise didn't ask about Zara, and I didn't offer. That chapter was closed, at least for me. I never did hear from Zara again after that last knock on my door. And Nate, well, I heard through a mutual friend that he'd finally checked himself into a rehab center. Maybe he'll claw his way out. Maybe he won't. But that's not my story to follow anymore. What I do know is that I stopped waiting for an apology, for justice, for things to feel right again. I stopped letting the weight of what they did to me define how I saw myself. I was no longer the punchline, no longer the dependable, invisible man who smoothed over everyone else's messes while they laughed behind his back. I was just Sam, a man rebuilding his life one quiet morning at a time. A man who found solace in books, in long walks, in the warm presence of someone who didn't expect him to be anything but himself. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for. The past didn't vanish. It lingered, like the last notes of a song fading into silence. But it didn't control me anymore. I let it go. And when I finally did, I realized something simple, something I'd overlooked in the wreckage. Some stories don't need a perfect ending, just a new beginning.